And welcome back as we go ahead and jump into looking at how C++ is going to handle loops. And one thing you're going to notice is that these structures for loops are going to be very similar to what we are already used to if we are coming from a language such as Java. So let's go ahead and look at loops in C++. There are three types of loops that we can deal with, which are for loops, while loops, and do while loops. Again, if you think about how we think in Java, Java has a for loop, Java has a while loop, Java has a do while loop. So our Java experience is probably going to work really well for us here. So let's look at the for loop. With the for loop, of course, you can see syntax, again, very similar to what we already know. We have an initialization statement, we have a condition, and we have an update. So, for example, we have int I equals 1 as our initialization, I is less than or equal to 5, and then, of course, I++. Naturally, you can, of course, change those out for any other conditions or updates or anything that you want to do. For example, you could do I minus minus. You could do I plus 2. All these, of course, are going to be whatever you want that loop to be able to handle for that next iteration. And then inside that body loop is going to be whatever code you want that loop to do. Now, just as a refresher, the for loop has those three parts that we talked about. We have the initialization, which is what initializes the variables and executes it only once. This is typically going to be something like int I equals 1 or int I equals 0. We have a condition, which is a Boolean expression that's going to check to see whether or not that expression is still true. And then the body of the loop will be executed. And then we're going to have our update statement, which is simply just going to update the value of that initial variable, which in this case, for example, was I. Then there are range-based for loops, which are kind of a variation of the for loop. In C++ 11, a new range-based for loop was introduced in order to work with arrays vectors. Its syntax, of course, was for variable collection, and then we had some body loop. This is very similar to the for each loops that we are used to in Java. So for every value in the collection, the for loop is executing the value, then is assigned to the variable. So this one, we have like for int n in num array, cout n, and then a space. So this is, of course, just going to iterate through each of those elements within that collection. Then, of course, if we look at while loops, the while loop condition is going to be, again, very similar to what we expect because that condition is just going to be a Boolean statement that can then test. So, for example, while I is less than or equal to 5, and then inside that, we can have it do whatever we are expecting. Just remember that don't forget to have some kind of incrementer or decrementer that's going to allow you to change the value of this loop here unless you want this loop to run infinite. Because if the loop runs infinite, it's never going to exit. It's a lot harder to have an infinite loop in a for loop than it is in a while loop. Very easy to forget to put this one line of code here and then wonder, wait, why did my loop just keep running? Now, a while loop, of course, is going to evaluate that condition with the following. If the condition evaluates to true, the code inside the while loop is executed. Then the condition is evaluated again. So we're looking at that Boolean expression. I is less than or equal to 5. All right. So if we start off, for example, if I starts at 0, well, the first time, 0 is less than or equal to 5. Then we say we increment by 1. Well, now it is now the value of 1. So is 1 less than or equal to 5? Yes, it is. And this process is going to continue until we reach a point where that Boolean expression is false. If it never evaluates to false, though, remember it will be an infinite loop. Similarly, we, of course, have the do while loop. Now, the do while loop, of course, is a variant of the while loop where the body of the do portion is executed at least once before that condition is checked. And because the body loop is executed first and then the condition is evaluated, that means that if the condition evaluates to true, the body loop inside the do statement is executed again. And if it evaluates, again, it's going to evaluate again and say, okay, well, then we're going to evaluate true or false. And if it's true, the body inside that loop is going to be executed again, and it's going to continue until it's false. So again, do whatever's here inside the do statement once, test this condition. So it's going to evaluate that Boolean expression. So for example, if we had I is less than or equal to 5, like we had with our while one, and we started at 0, that means it's going to come in here and say, oh yeah, this 0 is less than or equal to 5. So yeah, this is going to happen again. Do whatever in this do block, come down here, test, rinse and repeat until it's no longer true. Now, C++ also has the break and continue statements. C++ uses both break and continue syntax to either terminate a loop or to skip the current iteration. So this is an example, of course, of using a continue statement. So we have for int I equals 1, I is less than 5, I plus plus. we're setting up some condition to continue, which is I equals 3. And so if it does equal that, we're simply going to say continue. So it's going to skip that current iteration and then move back onto the next one. And so here we have a quick bit of code that's going to allow us to go ahead and demonstrate a for loop and a while loop. And I'm going to actually add a comment here because I didn't add a cout statement. So let's just say demonstrating a while loop. And I'm going to just change this actually to a comment as well. So let's go ahead and make this instead of a cout statement. Let's just say demonstrating a for loop. There we go. So let's go ahead and look at the for loop. It's a very basic one. It's pre-parameterized. So you can see we're going from 0 to 5. And it's just simply going to output the value of I. Then down here, we're demonstrating a while loop. I should actually move this here because this is all part of that while loop code. In here, you can see that we are using a Boolean to control our while loop. And we are, of course, asking the user to enter a number between 1 and 10. And then it's going to then iterate through that loop until it finds 10 and fall out. So let's go ahead and give that a quick test here just to see that in action. And so the for loop just print out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it's saying choose a number between 1 and 10. Let's go ahead and just type 4, hit enter. We get 4 is not 10, 5 is not 10, 6 not 10, 7 not 10, 8 not 10, 9 is not 10. Perfect. But what happens if I run that same program again and I were to put in a value such as 11? It's only one larger, right? What's going to happen? Well, if I hit enter, we get the statement here that says, you can't follow directions. Because what happens is when it goes in this loop, what it encounters this break statement and immediately falls out, terminating that loop. So again, a quick demonstration of how to use loops here with C++. Again, if we're coming from our Java background, this is nothing too much different than what we already know. Biggest thing is, of course, again, whenever we start looking at these other programming languages, is starting to learn the syntax for how to use those particular languages.